Luke chapter number 5. We have on Wednesday nights been discussing and going over some of our 12 disciples that we have known about in our study on Sunday mornings. We've been going through the life of Christ, and these disciples keep coming up by name, and so on Wednesday nights we are now studying who these people are and how that we don't want to emulate the actual apostles or disciples, but we do want to emulate and become more like Christ by learning what did God do in their life and how God transformed those people. We can learn how God can do the same thing with us on a day-to-day basis. Amen. And so I always want to make sure that when we talk about a certain person, that I'm not saying go out there and be a Paul or go out there and be a Peter, because listen, those guys had failures. Those guys struggled, they stumbled, they fell. But here's the thing, is that we also know that those men, and throughout the Bible, the ladies that God used, there was something God did in their life, and He can do the same thing with us today. Amen. And so that's why we're studying these things. And so far, we have covered two disciples. The first one we covered was James, and he was the first martyr. He was, outside of Stephen, that is that he was the first martyr that was killed. And then we look at just some of the things that have happened with his life, about how that he was considered to be called the sons of thunder, one of the sons of thunder. He had a brother that followed, that was part of the inner three, Peter, James, and John. His brother was John. And so we learned a little bit about him, about how he had great zeal, and how that at times his zeal got him into trouble. He sometimes didn't know when to shut his mouth. Sometimes was saying things that was a little bit harsh. And how that zeal God took and used it to become very zealous for the sharing his faith, and how God took what really at one point in his life was his greatest weakness, and God transformed it to become his strength to be used for the church and the advancement of God's kingdom. Last week we didn't look at a very good disciple. We looked at the one that failed, the one that betrayed. We looked at Judas and how he kind of got to where he was. It wasn't just one decision. It was a process of falling away and deciding to turn his back on Jesus. And so tonight we're going to look at another disciple, one that we want to look at Luke chapter number 5, and we're going to look there in verse number 27. And it says, "And after these things he went forth and saw a publican." And if you want to know what a publican is, IRS, tax collector. All right, that's who this is. "And after these things he went forth and saw a publican named Levi sitting at the receipt of customs. And he said unto him, Follow me. And he left all, rose up, and followed him. And Levi made a great feast in his own house, and there was a great company of publicans and of others that sat down with them. But the scribes and the Pharisees," notice what their response was, "they murmured against his disciples, saying, Why do you eat and drink with publicans and sinners? And Jesus answering and said unto them, They that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Tonight we're going to look at the apostle who here is called Levi, but many of you might actually know him better as the author of another book in the Bible, the book of Matthew. This is Matthew, also called Levi, and so this is yet another disciple that Jesus comes up to and tells him, and it's not a question. If you look at there at verse number 27, I've never really noticed this. It wasn't like, follow me, question. It's a statement that Jesus says, follow me. And here's what we see is Levi, Matthew, made the decision to leave all, to rise up and follow, and then have a great get-together, a potluck at his house. Well, whenever we come to what we're looking at is that we've really come to the conclusion that when Jesus goes after the people and calls them to follow him, it's not like he went after those who had the religious titles of PhD, doctorate, or anything like that. he went after the everyday, ordinary person in and around that time. It wasn't like he was looking for the famous people. It wasn't like he was looking for the best priest or the best rabbi or the best, I guess you could say, Pharisee. He wasn't looking for those people. He was actually looking for the people that were just ordinary. People who struggle, people like you and me. It's interesting because what we see is that whenever he begins to select these people, what's interesting is that you could look throughout the Bible and find out some scriptures about what Jesus finds to be, I guess you could say, a good qualifier to follow him. In Matthew 19:30, it says this, "But many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first." You see, Jesus isn't looking for those who are trying to gain position and become first. He's looking for those who are just willing to serve in the background. James would later say this way, God resists the proud, but what? Gives grace to the humble. He's looking for humble people, not arrogant. We know that in 2 Corinthians 12:9 it says, "My strength is made perfect in your weakness." What God is looking for are people who are willing to be humble, who are willing to admit their weaknesses and let God use them even though they're weak. I think that one thing that people struggle with today is that we feel like we got to have everything figured out with the Bible. We got to know it, all of it, forwards and backwards. Now, David, you pastored for a number of years. Do you know everything about the Bible? No, he's chuckling. No, he doesn't know everything about the Bible. I could look at the number of us in here today, and after all the times that we've read it, and the Bible colleges that we may have attended, and the books that we've read, we don't know it all. And if we're honest, sometimes we read something and we're like, I don't know if I understand all of this. What I'm trying to point out is that God's not looking for you to have it all put together. God's not looking for you to have everything completely understood. He's willing to look at you and see you in your weakened state, in your humble position, in need of grace, and he's going to help us become the person we need to be. If we really think about it, though, is that we are all, including Matthew, just tools in God's hands. That's who we are. We are the clay. He's the potter. He's making us. He's fashioning us into what he wants us to be. And sometimes the road to get there is not always pretty or easy. Just not. He's not looking for arrogant people. He's not looking for that. But unfortunately, if we were to look at the life and kind of look into the life and history of Matthew, we could find out a couple things about him, and that he was probably not the most humble man. He might not have been the most arrogant, but he definitely at times had a negative spirit and outlook. He was not the person that he needed to be, but God saw past that to see what he could be. And Matthew, my goodness, when we look at Matthew, the book of Matthew is such a rich book to come from a person like this. So Matthew, like the other disciples, he was a Jew. Now, he's a Jew that was in the region of Galilee, and like the other disciples, Matthew at some time had got a understanding and learning about the things of God. If you remember right, many of the disciples, some of them were followers of John the Baptist, but many of them grew up with the understanding of God in the Old Testament. And the book of Matthew, which is, of course, penned by him, has more references to the Old Testament, Psalms, and prophets than Mark, Luke, and John combined. So Matthew knew something about the Old Testament. So apparently, he had the knowledge about the Old Testament. He had a passion at some point for God, but somewhere along the way, something happened. We're not sure what it is, but something happened with Matthew because he experienced some type of what people and kids today are calling destructing of their faith. They're deconstructing their faith. It's a very sad thing that I see that's going on in our culture is that we have kids that were raised up in church. There's kids that were raised up to know God, but they come to a point where they have to really find out their faith on their own. And what happens if, I believe some who may not have even really been saved, they're going through and deconstructing it to unlearn some things and try to find a new way. And It's sad because there's some people who are, when they deconstruct their faith, maybe they came from a church that was not a great church, but hey, they taught them at least the Bible, but they've deconstructed their faith to walk away from it completely. Friends, I've got friends who I went to Bible college with that have gone through this, went through, studied out their faith, found out all the little faults about it, and then eventually just walked away. Now here's the thing, is we don't know what happened with Matthew, but somewhere along the way, Matthew abandoned his Jewish lifestyle, so to speak. Why do we say that? Because he basically turned on his own people. Matthew chose a lifestyle of not necessarily fame among his people, but at least appeasement with the Roman government. You have to understand, to be a tax collector in that day, you're not collecting taxes for the Jews. You are taking from the Jews, and then you are making the Romans rich off the taxes of the Jews. Now here's the thing though, what made the tax collectors even more hated is that the Romans allowed and even encouraged, here's the tax bill, it's $10, let's just say it's $10. You can charge $15 or $20 and turn in the $10 and you can pocket the rest. Now here's the thing, he is a tax collector in a region and area he grew up in. So it may very well been that he has sat at the table of some of the people he's scamming and taking extra money from and lining his own pockets and faring what we see later in the Bible. It says he's faring sumptuously. He's not hurting for money. It says that he has a big home here. It says he has a home to house a lot of people, a great company. If you look at verse 29, he has a great company at his house. He's got a nice house. He's left behind the Jewish way of living, probably the synagogue lifestyle. So we can put it in this day, let's put it in today's terminology. He left behind the church life to chase after money and chase after lavish things. And when he did, he turned his back on his people. And then really the way he got rich was by scheming and stealing from them. Now how would you like that to be your son? What's your son do? I don't know. I don't got a son no more. Because if you were to tell him that you're a tax collector, that would have been pretty much you even as a father were blacklisted. You were put out to dry. You were no longer honored. Here's the thing about this. He walked away, and we see this throughout the story of the Bible. People will walk away from faith to choose comfort and money sometimes if having to give a choice. So that's what he did. As a tax collector, he was hated. Here are some of the reasons, and I kind of listed some already, but they were crooks, they cheated. They were traitors, they were sympathizers of Rome, which the Jews did not like. They were greedy, materialistic. Their lifestyle was probably usually less than godly. Now here's the thing, is that when we look at this publican and sinners, you see that throughout the Bible. Jesus sat at eating with publicans and sinners. You have to understand, when a Jewish person became a tax collector, all right, here are the Romans, here are things like what they would even say, like the Gentiles, the Samaritans, and then way down here is a tax collector. Listen, most Jews would have more of an appetite to sit with a sinner who is not right with God than they would in a person who has abandoned them and became a traitor and was stealing from them. So that's the way Jews thought of publicans. They're sinners. They're right there with them no matter how good they are. Here's what we know of them. You are no good to us. Isn't it interesting that Jesus goes up to this person? I mean, Peter, we can work with Peter, right? He's a fisher of fish, fisher of men. We can we can apply that to him. He knows people. He's got a business, and so does James and John and Andrew, and there are people we can work with. There's a zealot that's passionate that we'll later learn about, but a tax collector? Well, what is it that we see that Jesus sees in this man. Maybe he is starting to, at some point, maybe he has heard the rumblings of what John the Baptist has preached. Maybe he's even up to this point from Luke chapter 1 to chapter 5, there has been some miracles that have taken place. Maybe he's heard about this, and maybe, just like some people today who have deconstructed their faith, they have come to a place of emptiness. They've left behind the church, they've left behind their faith, and they started to feel a feeling that's even worse, empty. God's not included in their life. Listen, here's what we could see, is that very likely for a season of his life, Matthew's chased money, parties, he's chased the idea of lavish lifestyle. He's chased all these things, the finer things of life, and somehow it wasn't enough. It really kind of leads us to our first point, and that is this: sin or a worldly lifestyle never pays off. It never does. You know, we can really kind of get ourselves really distracted at looking at bigger and better things, trying to get to a lifestyle of a certain prominence, of certain wealth status, even just trying to, listen, I know the majority of us in here, we're not like, hey, I'm going to be a millionaire, that's what I'm working for. I don't think we're those kind of people. But hey, most of us are just trying to make it by right now. But do you know that sometimes we still struggle with, hey, I want more, I want to get ahead, and sometimes we choose things to try to go that lifestyle to get more and more and more. It's not just the getting and the money thing that was also an allurement. The money was just the tool to be able to purchase a lifestyle he also wanted. He wanted the freedom to be able to go and do what he wanted. He wanted the freedom to be able to live how he wanted. And probably what happened is the Jewish religion and his family set a set of rules and regulations and boundaries around his life that he knew that money could unchain and he could walk away from. I'm going to tell you something. There's something to be said about a loose dog when he gets out of a fence that is scary. You know why it's scary when a dog gets out of its fence? Is because they don't sometimes know the danger that is outside the boundaries of the fence. I've had a dog, unfortunately, get run over when I was a kid. I've had those things happen, and I'm sure maybe you have too, but sometimes they think that we're trying to be so mean to them. Nutmeg, stay in. Don't go off the gate. Cole, don't you go. You know, they look at me like, man, you're just so mean. But little do they know that the reason why I'm asking them to stay in the fence, in the boundaries, is because somehow, for some reason, I like them. I don't know why. I like my dogs. And I don't want them to get out. Maybe it's because I don't want to run after them. That's probably more it. But here's the truth, is we love our pets. We don't want them to get run over. But here they are. They're just running around. They think, I got out. I'm going to go live my best life now. Listen, that sounds a lot like the prodigal son. The prodigal son said the same thing. Let me have all of your wealth. Dad, pretend like you're dead. Give me my inheritance, and I'm going to live it up. Did it pay off for him? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, he came back poor, broke, had just been eating with swine, and he comes back to his father begging for a place. Listen, what we have to understand is that there are times that we will look at the grass on the other side, and in our mind, the living inside of the Christian boundaries is not green grass. We feel like it's got thistles and all sorts of stuff. So we start to look and to gaze, and we start to think that there's something more to this life, and we can have it. We can have both lives. Here's the truth, though. We understand that the grass is greener always where you water it. You water the faith that you have. You stay to the Word of God. Let me tell you something. When you fall in love with God and the message of Christ, what you decide is that really the lifestyle of this world cannot pay off. Amen. And I'm telling you something. You just look out there today. In our culture, my goodness, there's just things that I see sometimes. I look and I laugh, and I'm like, this is just crazy. But then there's other times I look at what's going on with interviews that are being had with teenagers and with kids who who are at an all-time high, going through depression and loneliness because they are so fixated on their devices that sometimes they have got their life and mindset in a virtual reality that they have no idea what the concept of actually having a true friend is. They chase a life that's not even real. And what is happening is we're seeing all over is that there are people who are looking for a lifestyle and an answer to their questions. And they're trying to find it by switching their lives. And we can go down that path. You know where I'm talking about. Switching things in their life. And at the end of the day, none of that answers the true question that they're seeking is, why am I here? What is purpose do I have? And yet I go and I seek it. But I'm going to tell you, we're always going to come up short if the answer is not found in Christ. You see, we sometimes buy into a lie that if I just seek out pleasure and find it, that I'll be happier. Man, if I get the bigger and better, if I have more, if I do the things that I want to do, if I'm able to, just not have to give to the church or tithe or anything like that, or be a faithful attender. If I didn't have to do all those things that are inside the boundary, I could have a lot more fun. So I choose to step outside the boundary. Can I tell you, God has given us a certain rules and regulations, and I hate to even say that, but he's just saying these are guidelines for your life that I'm telling you, if you stay in this, there is safety and blessing. You go outside of here, though, understand this, it will not pay. I know I've said this quote before a lot, but sin will take you further than what you want to go, and it'll keep you there longer than what you want to stay, and it will cost you more than what you want to give. Friends, I understand the world is calling us. Come on. Hey, you want to become more like this. I am telling you, it is so discouraging to me to see that same call go out to the little kids. I'm telling you, friends, that if we have kids, it is our job to keep them in the boundaries. It's our job to show them, listen, that lifestyle that's being portrayed, it's not a good one. It's not one that pays off. Here's the truth. Sin doesn't pay. It doesn't. And here's what we have to understand is that that's where we find Matthew, though. He's been living in a life separated from his Jewish religion, his family. He's chose to seek after a different lifestyle, maybe because he was deconstructing his faith, or maybe simply because he just was tired of living poor and he wanted riches. Matthew teaches us that sin doesn't pay. A worldly lifestyle does not and cannot satisfy. So we should live right and make the choices that lead to staying in the boundaries of the Lord. The thing, though, is that when I look at him, there had to have been something. There had to have been something gnawing at his spirit. Because when Jesus comes up to him, what seems to be out of nowhere, now we don't know the stories behind the scenes, he comes up and, like I said, it's a statement, follow me. Notice right away what happens. He didn't sit down and look at his 401k and see if he had enough money to go on the road with Jesus. He didn't sit down and figure up what it was going to cost him. No, listen, whenever he did this, it says that he left all, he rose up and followed him. It seems like that there was something in the heart of Matthew that was seeking out, was searching. And when he found Jesus, something about Jesus drew him to the point where he says, I'm leaving it all behind. Now, friends, some of you had chose at one point in your life a lifestyle that you knew wasn't bringing you the answers of fulfillment and happiness and joy that you wanted. But when God came into the equation, some of you says right away, I will follow you. I will stand up. I'll walk away from this. Whatever it takes, I want to please the Lord. See, friends, that means this. That day was not the start of the perfect life of Matthew. As a matter of fact, friends, Matthew had an up and down life just like us. See, when he chose to follow Jesus, it wasn't that he chose to become perfect, because he knew that was never going to be the case. Jesus knew. More than anything, Jesus knew. But here's something, point number 2 I want us to look at, is that despite how far gone you are, despite how many poor things or deconstructing of your faith, is that God can and will forgive the greatest of sinners. Listen, that's exactly what he did. I want you to think of now you have to, once again, let's go back to that betrayal of becoming a tax collector and turning on your own people. That was a very big deal. Think of this. Who were some other tax collectors? Well, who was one of the more famous ones we know about? Zacchaeus. He was a wee little man, but Zacchaeus was a tax collector. And something with his life too. Jesus started raising up questions. So what does he do? He climbs up into a sycamore tree for the... I see some of you went to Sunday school. So, okay. Anyway, so the Lord, he wanted to see. He wanted to see Jesus. And as Jesus passed by the way, we know the story. He looks up, sees him there, and what does he say to him? Come down. I'm going to whose house? Your house. No, I'm not going to the Pharisee's house. I'm not going to the high priest's house. I'm going to your house, Zacchaeus. That is the craziest thing that a person like Jesus could say. But that's what he does. And I think part of it is because by this time, he has already got Matthew following along with him. See, there was also the publican that was mentioned in Luke 18 that had turned his life around. Listen, Jesus had a heart for these people. Luke chapter 15 verse 1 says that then drew near unto him all publicans and sinners for to hear him. There was something about Jesus that drew the sinners, that drew the publicans. And it says in Luke 7:29, and all the people that heard him and the publicans justified God, being baptized with the baptism of John. Listen, these people, it's like Jesus found a niche of people who were disillusioned with the life they chose, and he went and said, there's something more. Follow me. Now here's what we have to see as well. As downtrodden and as despised as they were, Jesus saw something in them. This ought to give us some hope that even for our own family members and friends, that we could say that it probably is impossible for God to save that person. Listen, don't ever give up. Don't ever lose faith that Jesus still doesn't go down to the low of lows, to those who have hard hearts and keeps knocking on their door of their heart. Listen, God still does that today. God still loves the Matthews. God still loves the Pauls. God still loves those that are the Zacchaeuses. God still reaches out to them, and he loves them and cares for them. And all it takes is at one point in time, when that person has come to a point in their own life, they're looking for something more. They're looking for answers of eternity. They're looking and facing reality of their own maybe mortality, that maybe it's then that God has softened their heart and they will receive that message. Friends, I don't know what it was, but something about when Jesus came up, it's like probably for the first time in years and years, somebody came up, listen to this, and saw him for who he was and loved him anyway. It had been years probably since somebody had a friendly conversation with Matthew. It had been years that people hadn't looked at him and judged him for the decisions that he had made and the lifestyle he had chose. Friends, this is something that we can think about even with everything that's going on this month. Please understand, never lose hope for people who have chosen the lifestyle you don't agree with, and don't count them out because God can still change their life. Amen. Friends, don't count them out. Don't turn that back on them. Don't treat them with hatred and disdain and look at them in disgust. No, look at them with the love of God in your life and say, I need to see them how Jesus saw Matthew. Because listen, as much as I do, so frustrated by everything this month entails, can I tell you that's what the Jews felt like when they saw people like Matthew. Oh man, I cannot believe. Look at him dressed in his fine clothes. He's turned his back on us. He turned his back on his faith. They hated him. But Jesus goes up with a different perspective and says, I see you for who you are, but I also know what I can do with you. Follow me. Friends, what a beautiful picture that all of us, one day, Jesus came up to us, in spite of how far we were gone, came up and said, follow me. The question is, what do we do with it? Now, many of you I know have picked up and followed. Some of you, it took a little bit. For some of us, it just took one call and we went. Really, all this, though, leads us to have to make some decisions of our own. Because, friends, sinners, people who are lonely, hurting people, can be helped if someone loves them enough to bring them Jesus. I really want us to look at our thoughts and our motives and our processes that we have sometimes in our mind when it comes to people we don't like. I know there are times that you can look at this world and some of the promoters of the things that are going on in this world, and man, it's hard for us to look at it as a Christian. We look at it in the flesh sometimes, and I don't know about you, but I find myself wanting to get mad and yell at the world and just say, the world's gone crazy, and it's just the world's on fire, and man, we can get so disillusioned with how bad things are that we forget that we still serve a God who's in complete control of the entire world and existence of universes and comets and asteroids in space. God knows and has control of all those things. And yet we get so frustrated when a person votes a certain way, has a certain yard sign out in their yard, shares their opinions on things. Hey, listen, this is where I don't want to get too invasive into our lives, but friends, we make a lot of big deals about things that will cause us to separate from somebody that Jesus died for, that he would not have separated himself from. You know who he separated himself from more than anybody? Was those who talked the religious talk, but didn't walk it. He couldn't stand them. Called them vipers. He called them snakes. He called them whited sepulchres. They were empty inside, full of dead man's bones. Listen, what I'm trying to say is that Matthew is a great example of somebody that was so fallen away that, listen, I can almost promise you this. When Jesus walked by there and looked at Matthew and said, follow me, I'm sure Thomas went, what? No, not that guy. I can almost picture the sons of thunder going, no. Go, there's somebody that's got leprosy. Go talk to him. No, what I'm trying to say is that the other 11, they probably would have never even thought. It would never have crossed their mind to go say, Matthew, would you like to join us? Do you see the example Jesus set to the disciples? I want you to do this as well. I know you hate me. And sometimes I wonder if Matthew was just not a constant reminder of what Jesus was expecting them to do with their faith, is to share it to everybody. Not just those who were poor, not just those that were needy, not just those who needed healed, but those who were rich, those who had chose a lifestyle, those that had betrayed his people, and yet God forgave, and he should as well. But listen, that is the call for all of us. That is what all of us should do. We set aside. Now listen, I know you have your preferences. I know you have your convictions. I know that probably the majority of you have right ones, what we would even say biblical ones. But let's not let our biblical preferences, convictions, and decisions keep us from seeing a lost and dying world who, because they don't have Christ, don't act like Christ. You see, there's a point in which we need to see the harvest. It's huge. And it's getting bigger by each generation because more and more people are not becoming Christians. The number one growing religion is no religion at all right now. And friends, if that's the case, what I'm saying is we're not going to win the majority of people to faith by how mean we are. How many people we decide to ostracize and keep away. We're gonna win those, as I believe John says, John, anyway, where he says we win them, Jude says, that's who it is, wins them with the compassion Some having made a difference, having compassion. I believe sometimes we lack that as Christians. Now, friends, does this mean that we accept the lifestyles of the sinners? Never compromise truth. Never. Never compromise truth. But don't allow the truth to keep you from seeing a sinner that Jesus died for. Does this make sense? See, Matthew is a very good example of somebody who then, listen, it's amazing to me because maybe for the first time he's felt this acceptance. It says in verse number 29, if after he's risen, he's going to follow him. Levi made him a great feast in his own house, and there was a great company of what was there? What were they? The same profession as Matthew. Can you imagine those disciples sitting in there? I can almost imagine there was a disciple table, and then there was a tax collector table. And maybe right at the end of the tax collector table was Jesus. And I can almost imagine those 12 disciples where they're talking, or 11, they're going, I can't believe he's sitting over there. You know who also said that? The religious elite that walked by and saw what was going on. He sits with publicans and sinners. Maybe we would do us more good. Maybe it would do us more good for us to have a few more friends who don't know Jesus. Why? So you can be a light in their life. So you can share Christ with them. I want to make sure I balance this out. Don't compromise truth ever. Stand your ground, stand your faith. Don't ever compromise that. But also don't allow that to keep you from loving those who need Jesus. There are going to be some who walk away, will have deconstructed their faith, and they'll never come back. They don't want it. But you don't know who that person is. And since you don't know who that person is, keep praying for them, keep loving them, embrace them with love, and make sure you understand, maybe you will be the reason they choose to follow Christ and the rest of their family changes. You never know what could happen. I saw just the other day, how many remember Duck Dynasty? Anybody remember the Duck Dynasty guys? How many of you wanted to be Duck Dynasty after you saw Uncle Si and all those crazy guys? It just kind of got fun, didn't it? But I saw the one, I think it's Willie, the one who's one of the more famous ones. He was talking and he said that there was his dad was a drunk. His dad had a lot of problems. You know, the one who was actually the one who made the duck calls, the older one. And the story goes though that a preacher came to him at a bar and shared the gospel with him, talked to him, and eventually he got saved. And from that, his family changed because his wife got saved as well. Because his family got saved, this man who's a duck caller, duck commander guy, all of a sudden now he's on a stage speaking to hundreds and hundreds of people because his dad had a preacher who came into a bar, met him where he's at. Listen, I've never gone to a bar. I probably won't ever go to the bar to do this. But this guy did for this one man. Now, before you go and say, oh, Brad just gave me a stamp for me to go to the bar and go sit and talk. That's not what I'm saying. Special occasion for this, okay? After one man specifically. But understand this. One man went after the wretched person that guy was, and it led to Willie talking onto a stage to thousands of people about Jesus because one man decided to go after a wretch. And if you go back to the song, aren't we all wretches? To save a wretch like me. That's who we all are. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. And maybe tonight you need to think about who is the Matthew in my life that maybe I need to share the gospel with. It could be a family member. It could be somebody in your life. Maybe it's not even that you're going to share the gospel with them right now. Maybe it's right now you just need to start lifting their name up to God to soften their hearts. Maybe even get more people involved of softening their hearts. Maybe this month, instead of being so mad, maybe have compassion. Stop being so angry and just for a moment have a little bit of compassion that Jesus had. Maybe that would change our perspective on the whole mess we got going on in our world. If we start seeing people through the eyes that Jesus saw people instead of our religious, fundamental, just follow the rules eyes, expecting non-Christians to act like Christians. Maybe we need to pray for God to give us the eyes like Jesus had when he saw Matthew. God, this message was so convicting to me today as I was studying. I just can't help but think of how many times that I let Matthews in my life make me so frustrated.